The idea of this talk is to tell you that the debate in economic analysis was won by the Austrians, but from my point of view, they still did not find out. So basically, what I'm going to do is a review of what the debate was prior to Keynes's general theory. For now, I maintain my composure as the minutes pass. It's likely that I will say what I think. Maybe everyone knows what it means when I say the things I say.
Y
And for this, the logic is to understand Keynes's work in the face of what was the analytical framework prior to the general theory. And that is what later allows us to understand Friedman's work and how Friedman is the one who built the Austrian triumph. So basically, what you need to understand is how the world worked before the general theory. That is, basically both the Austrian school and the Stockholm school and the Cambridge school England are heirs of Wicksell. That is, everyone works with the idea of savings investment schemes, where, let's say, you know that, well, that is basically what is a person who saves. He is a person who has, if you like, more money than ideas, and an investor is a guy who has more ideas than money. That is, and that mechanism is coordinated via the interest rate. Where what must also be understood is that the interest rate is neither more nor less than a ratio of relative prices, which are today's prices in terms of tomorrow's. That is why if prices were to fall tomorrow, the interest rate would be higher, therefore they would consume less today, they would consume more tomorrow. There they have that growing function of savings in terms of interest rate. And under that idea also, let's say, those who would be willing to sell goods would be willing, if tomorrow's prices are higher than today's, sell tomorrow. In other words, when the interest rate falls, investment increases. That is to say, it is very important to understand this and how, let's say, relative prices in an intertemporal context have the interest rate implicit. And that basically what these three schools discuss is the financial counterpart with respect to that natural interest rate and the type of problems it can generate. In that sense, the Swedes were concerned about the theory of loanable funds, where basically what competition in the banking sector did was induce them to lower the interest rate in such a way that excess demand was generated in the goods market, because the interest rate was below the natural rate, and an excess supply was generated in the money market, and consequently, this generated inflation.
and lo que te-
As for what has to do with the Cambridge school, which is Robertson, let's say Keynes himself, the Keynes of the treatise that is destroyed by Hayek, the idea was that the mirror market was the bond market. So compared to a situation of pessimism and they were sold, the prices of the bonds fell too much. The interest rate remained above the level of intertemporal coordination. An excess of supply was generated in the goods market and therefore an excess of demand in the money market that induced deflation. And the reality is that Keynes's vision was not so bad either. Because what Keynes postulated is, well, look, if strictly speaking, people offer work inelastically, prices could become zero and still excess supply persists in the market of work. You have to understand the logic of the moment in which it was written. That is to say, logically, what concerned the Cambridge school was basically the problem of deflation and unemployment. And on the other hand, we have the Austrian school with Mises's bamboo boom theory, where Mises basically focused on monetary policy.
O sea,
Because at that time, the central banks carried out monetary policy from the control of the interest rate. Mises emphasizes the situation of a central bank trying to inflate the economy, putting the interest rate below the equilibrium level, generating an excess of demand, where this also generates a situation of consumption and investment simultaneously, making the economy operate above its possibilities by generating a monetary wedge. And what happens? When prices begin to rise, the real amount of money begins to fall, and businessmen discover that those investments were incorrect. That is, consumers cannot support that level of consumption. Why? Because the economy was pinched, and that is what later generates the boost. And in the middle, the capital structure is damaged. And that's where Hayek's triangles come in to explain this story in a much more complete way, so to speak.
ese era,
And in fact, the Austrian approach was so good that it dominated the scene. Until the Great Depression came.
y
And they're basically moish. The interesting point is that one has to understand who Keynes was. Keynes was part of the political corporation. Keynes wrote a book that was a pamphlet. It was a rubbish book that was dedicated to corrupt and messianic politicians. And that basically
de,
And there I really like the definition that Hazlitt makes, which says, look, everything that is good in this book is copied, and everything that is new is bad. The book is truly awful from the point of view of quality and economic analysis, but from the point of view of Keynes' strategy, it is brilliant. What does Keynes do? And this, I mean, it has happened to me to have to hear people say, no, it is a book that is poorly written. No, quite the opposite. It is formidable as it is written. It is a work of art. Basically, what Keynes does is hit on each of the vital aspects of the previous analytical framework. Notice that we are talking in a world where the interest rate is determined in the goods market with an intertemporal coordination mechanism. And in the money market, the price level is determined. In fact, when you have some mechanism by which, I don't know, I increase the amount of money, I influence the interest rate, I generate excess demand in the goods market, I have an excess supply in the goods market, money, that causes prices to rise. So what does Keynes do? Destroy that analytical apparatus, destroy it. Keynes' first blow of destruction is about savings. Basically what he does is create a consumption function that has several interesting components.
des.
The first is that Keynes, in his entire life, took only one economics course, which he took with Marshall. And what Marshall basically did was partial equilibrium. Then Keynes, as a faithful heir to Marshall, designs a consumption function with a partial equilibrium format, and that allows him to put current income into the function. By being able to put current income and put it as a constant fraction, call it the marginal propensity to consume, the average propensity, this has several issues. The first is that savings becomes a residue, and the intertemporality in the saving function is destroyed. The interest rate disappears. And as if all this were not enough, this construction allows you, in mathematical terms, to derive the multiplier and with it the adjustment of quantities. Crucial element to modify the level of the product with management of aggregate demand and with impact on the level of employment. Basically what the politicians wanted to hear. So there it destroys the first element of the goods market, where it makes savings disconnected from the interest rate, and instead of being something intertemporal, it is a residue that arises between income and consumption. The second phenomenal element is the investment function. When you take the first chapter, which is chapter 11, it is formidable. The description of the investment theory is formidable. Now in chapter 12, everything is undone. And he ends by saying that the investment is basically guided by a lyrical testicular issue, so to speak. Something like they invest if they have their balls sung. I mean, that's the idea of animal spirits. I mean, excuse the technical vocabulary. What does this mean? But what matters to me is that it is understood. So what this means that now investment is exogenous. The interest rate is no longer dependent. So investment doesn't depend on the interest rate. Saving does not depend on the interest rate. Saving does not depend on the interest rate. Now, in the goods market, anything can be determined except the interest rate. So what that does is not only break intertemporality and destroys the macroeconomics of capital and turns it into the macroeconomics of work. Why? Because now the only thing that can be determined with savings and investment is the PDI, and from there appears the miracle of the multiplication of the loaves. Because let's see, what is Keynes going to say to the politicians after this? Look, with public spending, you are the continuity of the arm of God. By increasing public spending, you can generate all the GDP you want. It is the miracle of the multiplication of pairs. Damn the slate producers, who make them so small. So that's what happens in Keynes's goods market logic. It's written for politicians. That is, the virtue was saving, now the virtue is spending. The more wasteful, the better. Happy politicians. That is the first point. The level of income is determined in the goods market now. Then, with adjustments in quantities, with a miracle in the multiplication of loaves. Fantastic. Come on. Everything would be great if it weren't for the fact that it's rubbish and everything is wrong. But let's go to the second point. The second point is the money market. In the money market, what you determine, as in any good, is the purchasing power of that good. That is, if I have a pears and bananas economy and I increase the quantity of bananas, the purchasing power of bananas in terms of pears falls. I need more banana to buy the same amount of pears with the money. The same thing happens. This was explained in Mises in the theory of credit. Book that was given to Keynes to translate, the proposal for it to be translated into English. Mr. Keynes said that this book was bad and that it should not be translated. But the worst of all is that Mr. Keynes did not know German. So what did Keynes do? It occurred to him to determine the interest rate in the money market. That is, he used the mirror market to determine the interest rate. And with that, what did it lead to? It destroyed the theory of capital, because now the interest rate as the price of money. What is the price of money? Price of money is its purchasing power, what you can buy with it, such as the interest rate. In other words, a truly incredible thing. But what did he do with this? It went on to determine income in the goods market and the interest rate in the money market. So what did I need now? I needed to determine the price level. And what he did, he used the labor theory of value. When you go to chapter 21 of that rubbish book, what it says is, prices are determined from costs. That is, an offense against Menger's principle of imputation that is tremendously violent. And we suffer that. Our policymakers suffer from it when they say they remember that lady and the businessmen pick her up with a shovel. Let's say the workers are very ambitious.
Osos.
Guys, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. When you issue any good that increases above its demand, its relative price, its purchasing power falls. What does this mean? That when I issue, the purchasing power of money will fall. Therefore, I'm going to have a price increase. And if I do it continuously, will I have inflation? Faced with this situation, Milton Friedman appears. The interesting thing about Milton Friedman is that while the Austrians stayed arguing in the ivory tower because it was a disgusting book, that it was a pamphlet, and that it was not worth discussing, they took everything and went to the politicians. What did Friedman do? Friedman sank into the Keynesian mud and fought in the Baroque-Nician. That is the difference. What you have to understand is that there are three Milton Friedmans. There is a Friedman from the Academy. There is a Friedman from the dissemination of books and the tyranny of the status quo. Free to choose capitalism and freedom, the series. Free to choose yes. And there is a Friedman who is the best of all, which is the Friedman of the conferences. The Friedman of the conferences combines the rigor of the academic Friedman, the dissemination capacity of the Friedman of free to choose, but above all, he is an exquisite Friedman, far above these two together. Because when you read books like Dollars and Deficits, Monetarist Economics, The Harms of Money, any of those books, or the one on development currency, I can assure you that Friedman is much closer to Mises than you imagine. If not, take Mises's lectures in Argentina and compare them with what Friedman says. What happens is that there is a Friedman who is the Friedman who fights in the academy in the Keynesian mud, and that is where his contributions come from. His first major contribution is on the epistemological question, why, basically to tell the Keynesians first the data. That's first, what I'm going to do is run with the data. And with that, you are hitting him from all sides. The second great contribution has to do with the theory of consumption. That is, it develops the theory of permanent income, builds an intertemporal consumption function, recovers the interest rate, and eliminates who? The multiplier. The miracle of multiplication is over, of the breads. The other contribution, where it comes from the middle of the 20th century, the inflation rate accelerates. The Keynesians could not give an answer to this. They formulate the quantitative theory as a function of demand for money. It shows that this function is stable. Therefore, which, this function being stable, if I issue above the demand for money, I generate inflation. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. The other blow that he gives them is the blow that he gives them together with Anna Schwartz in the Monetary History of the United States, Chapter 7, The Great Contraction from 29 to 33, where basically what it shows is that investment, they say, look, Keynesians, you have a nominal illusion problem. Having this problem of nominal illusion, they did not realize that even if the rate was zero, in real terms, it was enormous. And then there it shows that investment depends strongly on the real interest rate. And on the other hand, the fiction of the rigidity of downward prices, which the Keynesians said were inflexible, shows that this was not precisely what happened in the Great Depression. That is to say, prices had contracted sharply at the rate that the amount of money contracted, with which, in that aspect, the Keynesians, having achieved that fiscal policy was fully effective, said the Keynesians, but Keynes, and that monetary policy was of no use. Where the difference between Keynes and the Keynesians is that Keynes, he did believe in monetary policy, and as an extreme case, he used the liquidity trap. Friedman regains the power of monetary policy, saying that monetary policy is important, and what explains the Great Depression is monetary policy. And if it were not for the central bank, that is the Fed, thank you for the gift, whoever gave it, I am infinitely grateful. Recover the idea of the power of monetary policy. So Friedman had them knock out the Keynesians, and the Keynesians escape with the Phillips curve, that negative relationship between inflation and unemployment. And Friedman basically chewed on the idea for years. You see conferences from 60, 61, 63,
Tres.
and he looked at it between the relationship between the variation in prices and the variation in the quantity of money. And that is what he saw, that if money was neutral, let's say in terms of the academy, not in terms of what Friedman thought in the conferences, what he noticed was that there was a trade-off in the short, but that in the long it had to disappear. And that is what he does with the inflation-augmented Phillips curve. And this is the first great triumph of the Austrian school. Because when Friedman does this test, he is forced to go back to the micro foundations, because basically he develops a theory of the labor market where he says, look, in the labor market, the real salary is determined if expectations are adaptive. When the central bank modifies monetary policy, businessmen will be feeling that prices are higher, so they believe that real wages are falling, and they go out to hire more people. And of course, for that, they have to pay more for salaries. So wage earners believe that they will have a higher real salary. Therefore, the economy trades out of equilibrium and produces above equilibrium. It's the boom. But then what happens? The agents found out that in reality what there was that there was more inflation, which was not an improvement in relative prices, but rather that all prices were rising, and with which comes the boost. That is, then the economy moves towards a similar level of employment prior to the shock. That is, the unemployment rate returns to its natural level, but now with a higher level of inflation. And this was basically finished in the year 68 and the year 72. Lucas finished annihilating the Keynesians with his paper on rational expectations and validated it empirically in the year 73.
Tres.
That is to say, what you see is that to finish beating the Keynesians, it was necessary to return to the micro foundations, it was necessary to return to the Austrians. But not only that, that is, there had been victory over a part of the economy. That is, the fight in the labor economy had been completed using the micro foundations. So once this problem of stabilization and all this was over, the economy returned to see what its real problem was, which was how we generate wealth, how we manage to grow. And then, already in the year 78, and this is told by people who were Lucas's students, Lucas was obsessed with the topic of growth. That is, the return of intertemporality.
The return of intertemporality.
Temporalidad.
When you take a mainstream academic paper today, it is all micro-founded and intertemporal. That is, the analytical framework that triumphed was the Austrian framework, intertemporality and micro-foundation.
Fundamento.
And in reality, this is the part that I'm most interested in highlighting, is that the Austrian school should be an upgrade. Because although today literature has the essence of what the Austrian school was, in fact, what is most on both, it seems to him that it is the theory of real cycles, and if they put money into it, it comes out automatically. But apart from that, my view is that the problem with the construction of the production function that is implicit in the Austrian works, growth cannot be explained. Because the presence of constant returns to scale inevitably means that at some point the process runs out, so to speak. I can grow as long as I accumulate capital and work. Now, population growth is basically exogenous. So it grows at a rate n, say 1%. So what is happening? I can accumulate capital. As long as I'm below the equilibrium level, I will show growth. But that is also in Solo's model. And what is the problem? There comes a time when the process becomes saturated, and I am limited in my growth in what? In the population growth rate.
Entonces,
And the structure. And that also goes for the Cass-Cookman model, also known as the Ramsey model, which is still more similar to the Austrian concept. They are all there. There is intertemporal preference. It is all there. Well, there are no Hayek triangles, but instead of having one good, they take two goods with different intensities and reproduce the result of the triangles. So what was the problem with that literature? That literature, in order to explain growth, needed to put exogenous technological progress. And the truth is that to explain the growth, let's see, to give you an idea, Solo's model explains only 15% of the growth. 85% was left out. That is to say, I am buying a structure where what explains growth is determined by hand. That is not a theory. And economic theory advanced towards endogenous growth models. Obviously, where did they come from? Through Chicago. With Paul Romer and with Robert Lucas, where Robert Lucas is an heir of Hirofumi Usawa, who was the first to generate the endogenous growth model with human capital. Although it was not called that at that time, because in Chicago in the 60s, it was developed with this idea of human capital as a result of the failure of Solo's tests. And why the idea of human capital? Because now they do not have the restriction of accumulating work, because they can educate themselves and consequently grow more. Then the accumulation process is not exhausted. And let's say that is what Romer does, what Lucas does, and that is where the theory of endogenous growth is born. Therefore, to close this, from my point of view, the Austrians won the debate, the micro-foundations were returned, intertemporality was resumed, Hayek's triangles can be rescued in more complex structures. But in order to move forward and get on with the avant-garde, you have to be able to explain growth and reality in order to explain growth again. What you have to do, despite the error of the labor theory of value, is to go back to Adam Smith. So if the Austrians combined all that rich contribution that has been made along with the theories of endogenous growth, plus lifting the principles of Adam Smith, surely the Austrian school would once again become the mainstream of economics. That's all.